Marty Nicholson is a curator of the Hoyt Arboretum with the Portland Parks and Recreation Department in Portland, Oregon. Um, Hoyt Arboretum is one of Oregon's premier tree collections with 2,300 taxa of trees and shrubs from around the globe. It's known widely for its extensive mature conifer collection, some of which are approaching 100 years old. Martin will describe some of the key plants in the collection with a focus on the California conifer collections. Um, some of the species have been supported by previous grants from the American Conifer Society. Um, the talk will cover North California and Southern Sierra collections and visits to restricted range endemic species. And I believe some of the recently funded trip to collect seeds for some endangered species. Um, Marty's started his adventure in agriculture at the Lincoln University in New Zealand. He's a certified arborist since 2016, and he's worked with the Oregon State University and Washington State University facilities for plant health manager and with Frank Schmidt Nursery. He's been at the Hoyt Arboretum for 17 years and serves on the Great Plant Picks Tree Committee and the Portland Heritage Tree Committee. So thank you, Marty. Looking forward to your lecture.
Excellent. This is awesome. Really great opportunity. Thanks for making this work out, and just appreciate everybody taking some time out of the day to hear about the Arboretum. And I'm going to cover kind of what's about the last sort of 5 years worth of collection trips to different parts of California. The most recent of which was focused on some priority species collection and funded by the conservation grant from the American Conifer Society. And talk a little bit about Hoyt Arboretum first and some of the partners that we work with on these collections. And next slide, let's see. There we go. Hoyt Arboretum is Portland Parks and Recreation Park. We're 200 acres. We're located in Washington Park, which is a 450-acre park and kind of a tourist destination for folks from around the country and globe that visit Portland. It houses the Oregon Zoo, the World Forestry Center, the Japanese Garden, the International Rose Test Garden, extensive landscapes in Washington Park, a large natural area, and then 200 acres that is the Hoyt Arboretum. Hoyt was established in 1928, so we're approaching our 100th birthday here in a couple more years. And the Hoyt Arboretum Friends Foundation is a really important part of what makes Hoyt work. The Friends Foundation is actually in their 40th year and has grown into an organization that runs all of our visitors services and education programming that happens at the Arboretum. So about 7,000 school children will visit the Arboretum, plus adult classes, and just the engagement that happens in our visitors center, just informing people about how to get around the Arboretum and have a great experience while they're there. So the Hoyt Arboretum Friends also helps to fund this collection trips, and also a lot of improvements around the Arboretum as well. So a really important partner. And I think, we wouldn't be kind of in the situation we are today without that partnership and the advocacy work that happens from the Friends side. Hoyt has sort of three really important collections. One we're obviously touching on today is our conifer collection. We're the Western Region American Conifer Society reference garden. We have around about 300 species of conifers. Excuse me, depending on how you cut it up, if you get into the subspecies and things. But we also have a part of the multi-site maple collection and multi-site magnolia collections through the Plant Collections Network, which is an American Public Gardens Association network of gardens that work on particular collection priorities. We're also part of the Global Conservation Consortia for oaks, and have been doing quite a bit of oak collection and adding to the garden as well. Our conifers, cover a range of things. Wollemi pine in the middle here is just such a great example of why botanic gardens are important for conservation of a species, and how just ex situ, or basically conserving a plant outside of its natural range, can be an important part of getting people familiar with a plant, seeing where it will grow, how it will grow. This is essentially a plant that it's in a single site, maybe 200 plants exist in the wild of this. And through conservation work, it's basically distributed globally. And there's probably, many more plants being grown in botanic gardens and private gardens around the world now than exist in its native population range. And this is just the important work that botanic gardens do. To the other side of the screen, you'll see a redwood grove, which is one of our sort of more popular groves for people visiting. Not everybody makes it down to California to see the big trees in person, and really the mature groves that we grow at Hoyt just provide this experience of walking through these sort of mixed conifer forests that just most people don't get the opportunity to do, visiting some of the places that I'll talk about today that I've had the opportunity to visit. We have an extensive true fir collection, and I'm a big fan of the true firs and just Abies cones. And this one is on Abies coreana, I believe that photo is. And then the larch cones on this other photo in this one. Our maple collection covers a wide range of species. This is just a little snippet of my favorites. Upper center photo is Acer sempervirens, which is for us mostly evergreen maple, one of the Mediterranean maples, and can be hedged and just has great characteristics. It's often in the trade as Acer orientale, I think, as well. And then below that is Acer opalis, another Mediterranean maple that has a great, really thick leaf and just a fantastic growth habit, and very drought tolerant, and way more than most maples. So it does pretty good. And then to the let's see, the right-hand side of the screen, this is Acer spicatum from the Eastern Rockies, and to the left, one of the Asian maples, Acer campbellii, subspecies campbellii. And then just a little quick snippet of magnolias, and then we'll really dive into conifers from here on out. I'll stop talking about all these other trees. We grow Magnolia ashii, and also this is actually Magnolia macrophylla as well, which is the largest, simple leaf tree in North America. And these flowers can be up to 20 inches across, pretty spectacular. Grow quite a few different cultivars of the Siboldi types, and all the Solangianas. There's, obviously lots of cultivated magnolias. And then the upper center is Magnolia officinalis, and then Magnolia wilsoni, one of the pendulous or Oyama type magnolias. And Hoyt has pretty much the only sort of public magnolia collection in the Portland area. There is a good magnolia collection down around Eugene. But for Portland, we're kind of the only public space that has an extensive magnolia collection. And these are going to peak bloom for us. This year is going to be early, probably around the last week of March into early April. We should see peak bloom for our grove. All right, we'll talk about California and conifers. I'm going to we're not going to hit every single conifer in California. I mean, California is an incredibly diverse state. So you have the Sierra Nevadas, we have the coastal ranges, the transverse range. It's a lot of different soil types, a lot of different moisture regimes, and about somewhere around 6,500 to 7,000 species in California, and maybe depending again how you cut it, up to maybe 8,000 if you look at some numbers, and about a 40% endemic species. So a lot of things in California are just in California. And so it becomes a real priority for collections for some of these single site or maybe three site endemic species. Other conifers, they might cover a sort of a largish range, but they're restricted due to altitude, rainfall within certain mountain ranges. And a lot of times what we see are sort of relic species as well. So we're going to sort of touch on those. Conifers, about 65 species, again, depending how you cut them up, dominated by pines, which are like the most, the largest of the conifer genera is the pine. So it's not too surprising, but California has about 26 species of pines, 10 Hesperocyprus or cypresses, and about 6 junipers and 6 true fir species, and then a scattering of other things. So pretty diverse conifers. The largest conifers, by volume, the tallest species of conifer are in California. Some of the oldest trees are in California, and then also, some very rare species as well. So there's lots of reasons to be down there collecting. One of the other reasons that, of course, that we look at California for collections is that as we assess kind of what the future, the next 100 years for Hoyt Arboretum looks like, we are sort of challenged with what is our, climate going to look like. And so we are using some climate assessment tools through the Botanic Gardens Conservation International. We're basically evaluating the climate that we have in Portland currently, what the future predictions are for Portland, but then also looking at some of the places that certain species of trees grow in California and what their future looks like. And we're trying to align our sort of priorities so that the trees that we bring to Portland and plant there are going to be the things that are going to be the next 100 years of Hoyt Arboretum, and make sure that we're sort of putting our energies into the right plants, both for conservation priorities, but also for how the Arboretum will look. And I did throw up, just for reference, the IUCN sort of rating for critically endangered, vulnerable. So you sort of have an idea on how that compares to like NatureServe and some of the other rating systems as well. Just as I sort of mentioned, threat levels, not everyone's familiar with some of those terms. And you'll see the different years on here, kind of where we've been going to for different collection years. And obviously there's a couple of years in there where we didn't collect due to COVID restrictions, but also a couple of years where there was pretty extensive forest fires and we weren't able to access the areas we had permits for. So 2021, we had to cancel our collection trip due to wildfire smoke. 2019, I'm going to touch on the transverse range. So this is the mountain range that basically swings from the Sierras out to the coast around Santa Barbara. And, the plant palette here, looking at it, it doesn't look very much like Oregon. Obviously, you see a lot of chaparral, a lot of frequent fire. But this is the southern range of Douglas fir. Pseudotsuga menziesii is about 30 miles sort of north of Santa Barbara. It's very restricted to north-facing slopes in that area. And then there's kind of a gap. And then what we see south of there is Pseudotsuga macrocarpa, the big cone Douglas fir. And so big cone fir looks very similar to Douglas fir. And we were really interested in this species because it's not widely grown in Oregon. In fact, the only one I'm familiar with outside of the ones that are now at Hoyt Arboretum is on the Oregon State campus. There's a large tree in a grove right at the center of the campus, and that tree was planted in the 50s, and it produces pretty substantial cones, and it's a great opportunity to see that tree. So it obviously will survive in Oregon. we're interested in it because, again, climate models show us that this is a tree that in its natural range, it is sort of in these little pockets of, this map's a lot of colors, but essentially it's showing precipitation on the left-hand side, and then the right-hand side is the range of Pseudotsuga, and the bit that's circled, that's Pseudotsuga macrocarpa. And so you'll see it kind of aligns with the slightly higher moisture that occurs in the transverse range, where there's rainfall that is there. And also it's restricted again to mostly northern facing slopes or areas where there is, water available. So it is fire resilient, and it gets to be a pretty large tree. You'll see on the bottom of this photo, there is a person there. I forget if that's me or Julian standing in that bottom of that photo. But you'll see, it's a pretty substantial tree, and we found this, reasonably easy to find in the sort of Figaro Mountain area, and then also at Otay outside of Santa Barbara. And one of the unique things about this is it's pretty fire resilient, and as it grows, fire goes through. It has the ability to resprout from the branches after fire, and so you get these trees that, like this, is sort of showing the character where all the new growth is on the upper top side of the branch, away from the heat of the fire, and so the trees can resprout from the trunk and resprout from these branches after fire events. The issue, of course, comes up where if the fires occur too frequently or the fire intensity is too high, the trees can't survive those fires. And so regeneration of the species, the tree can be a bit slow growing when it's small until it gets sort of established and sends down a lot of root growth first. And so fires, when the tree is small, can wipe those out. So again, it looks like a species where its footprint is getting smaller and smaller due to higher intensity fires. And so fire management regimes is important for the species, but then also just having, the right moisture ability. We found it pretty easy to grow from seed, and we've produced some seedlings. They are slow these first few years, but we have planted some out into the Arboretum, and so we're really watching them. The cone on these is really impressive. I mean, it is truly looks like a Douglas fir cone, supersized. It's about 4 times the size of a regular Pseudotsuga menzii cone, and pretty impressive. In 2022, our collections took us into the Klamath, and we we're mostly working on actually Sadler oak. We're the species champion for that particular oak species, and we're looking for that. But of course, being a bit of a conifer nut, and also when we're out traveling around on these collections, we're not just collecting the single species. We're also looking for other things in the area. Brewer spruce is a very limited range plant, and this sort of quote about it, will there be favorable conditions for brewer spruce in the future in its current range? It seems to be this photo in the very center, this Firebird landscape. This is actually in Oregon. This is their Babyfoot Lake trailhead, and this is the result of the Biscuit Fire, I think from 2002. That fire burnt one of the largest stands of brewer spruce that existed, so the largest contiguous stand. Just not far from where this area was, we did collect seed in 2011, and there were trees that survived in sort of narrow canyon areas where the fire moved through a little bit faster. And so in those fast, low intensity fires, brewer spruce does fine with. But again, we saw, how temperatures affected fire intensity, years of fire suppression. So some of these fires that blow up now are pretty extensive. The next fire photo in that same, right next door to the right of that, is on the highway going into Happy Camp. And this was a site that when the Millennium Seed Bank project from Kew went through and did collections of brewer's spruce. This was where they collected from. And we drove through that area looking for brewer's spruce before we realized that the stands that they collected from also had burnt. And so this is sort of the worry for that species is brewer's spruce is slow growing, extremely slow growing. It germinates pretty high at pretty high rates. Its main competitor for land space is Douglas fir, and because Doug firs are fast growing trees, and so what happens is brewer's spruce is kind of restricted to because it can tolerate some of the thinner soils, higher altitudes, some of the serpentine, and so it tends to be restricted to these sites because Douglas fir won't tolerate those tougher sites and it won't grow on serpentine. And so that just puts it into this very, very slow growth cycle. The really nice tree to the left is at up within the Conifer square mile of conifers. So this is on the hike up to Babyfoot Lake. It's in the Russian wilderness area. And that area is just contains some impressive brewer's spruce. And we also found it in another part of the Klamath. There is still, groves of trees. There is some recruitment, but in the areas where there hasn't been fires, the trees are doing fine there. It's just a concern about what the post-fire picture looks like for some of these groves. That's me up in that tree there and collecting some cones. The cones are incredibly sticky when they're small, when they're just right before they're ripe and opened. We'll see, open cones hanging on the tree from previous season, and then these smaller, completely coated in sap to the point that they stick to everything you touch when you're in the tree. So they're on your gloves, they stick to your hands. We're trying to collect these to get enough to collect seed off, and they're just incredibly covered in sap, which is seems to be typical of the spruce we've collected, and some of the pines. I think we've got a sap on there that's protecting the seed until the seeds are mature, and then as they dry, that sap it dries out, allows the cones to open. So it's just protecting the cone from predators like me up there collecting them as well. So this is that area. This is a pretty good sort of Klamath conifer mix. We can see probably some sort of serpentine or some sort of soil here that's restricting growth in some of that open area. We can see this is probably burned maybe 15, 20 years ago. There's good recruitment of young trees coming back into those spaces, and some larger trees in behind where there's more sort of density that maybe the fire hasn't burned through. And that matrix is really important for the regeneration of the forest. So it's always great to see areas where there is this open, and we're also really interested in these sites because of the mixed shrub layer. And these sites are a lot of times the plants we're looking for. Sadler oak loves these open sites. So when we're not looking for conifers, some of these areas are pretty excellent to get into. It's just sort of, again, it's hard not to put a lot of fire photos into this presentation. And I don't necessarily want to totally focus on this, but the extent and the number of times that we're traveling into areas where we're expecting to find certain tree species, and the fire events have come through, and the understory gets really diverse after these fires. And like I said, it's good for regeneration, but some of these high intensity fires, it's really questionable for some species how long it will take for these forests to sort of look the way they did before this fire. It's a very and the size of the fires are so extensive that sometimes you're just standing there staring across multiple valleys that are completely burned out, and it can be tough when you're out looking for conifer seed. We're going to jump from brewer's spruce to one of the species that I've been really fortunate to see now in northern and southern ranges. And this is one of the species that the American Conifer Society grant has helped us to do collections on. Pinus balfouriana, the foxtail pine. This is a great paper, the history of Abies bracteata, which you can find online if you're interested in relic conifer species and why are these trees where they are. Even though this paper is sort of focused around Abies bracteata, he does mention quite a lot about the other species in California and sort of how rainfall has restricted them to where they are, and also mean average temperatures. And the two populations, the northern and southern of these foxtail pines, are both in incredible locations to go visit. And this is Deadfall Lakes, Mount Eddy. Mount Eddy's the highest point on the west side of I-5 in the Klamath area, I believe. It's the highest point. And Mount Eddy is unique because the entire mountain is basically a serpentine soil type. And so it basically creates a bunch of endemic species that are on Mount Eddy. And also because of that soil type, the species competition for trees is somewhat limited to material that is adapted to that soil type. And this is a pretty substantial grove of Pinus balfouriana. We approach the trail from the Deadfall Meadow trailhead, but you can also hike the PCT. You can do this hike. It's a good day hike. It's about a 3-hour trip in, and there is some pretty major climbs in a few spots. It gets a little steep, but they're well worth the walk in. There's incredible range of species along the hike in, and then the valley where the Pinus balfouriana are. This is Mount Eddy kind of in the background, and the species here are incredibly long-lived. They're probably well over 1,000-year-old trees. They get heavy snowfall in the winter, so this is a summer accessible area. Cone maturity lined up really well for us in September. We have been into the site twice. The first year we collected just a few cones, about 30 cones, but there's not, for insects and predators that like to eat, there's not a lot of other things that provide maybe the protein punch that Pinus balfouriana does. And so the seed predation was extreme. And so in this collection, we only ended up with about, I think we ended up with maybe 120 viable seeds from the collection. Those were split amongst a few different gardens. And then Portland got hit with a really severe windstorm and extreme cold, and we lost power to all of our greenhouse facilities, and we actually lost all of our seedlings of Pinus balfouriana for that year, which was kind of crushing. And so we went and revisited the site the next year, collected quite a lot more material. All of our collections are done through a U.S. Forest Service grant or permitting process, and so we have this site works well for us because it's not in a wilderness area, it's not in the national parks. We can get a collections permit through the U.S. Forest Service, and they're a great partner to work with on this, on a lot of the species that we collect. And usually we're focused on collections on U.S. Forest Service lands, though we have done some on BLM land as well. It's hard to describe this area. It's a mix of Pinus balfouriana and Pinus monticola, western white pine, and the balfouriana. Its closest relatives, that section Balfouriae, are the bristlecone pines. So This is a close relative of Aristata, Longavia, and really, they're all relic species of some maybe 40 million years ago, a common species that occurred more widely across the West, Idaho, California, or Colorado, wide-ranging species that's had local speciation because they've basically become isolated in these mountain ranges. And so, yeah, really interesting plants. This last year, we had two grants that we were working off of. The one was through the Morton Arboretum and BGCI for a priority species grant, and the other one was the American Conifer Society that helped support this. And what we were targeting was three species that occur in the southern Sierras, and basing our collections out of Kernville and being able to go and get the southern foxtail pine, which is Balfouriana subspecies Ostrina. I put the wrong name in there. So Ostrina is the southern form. Balfouriana is the northern form of Pinus balfouriana. Then Juniperus grandis is Sierra juniper, and Cupressus navadensis, the Paiute cypress. Kernville, for those not familiar with California, it's a small sort of rafting river town tucked sort of right at the southern end of the Sierras. And it's a really transition zone. Kern County and Tulare County. Kern County has about a little over 2,000 species and incredibly diverse botanically because it basically crosses the range from the southern Sierras into the Mojave Desert. And so you get sort of the southern range of a lot of plants and the northern range of some of the desert plants. Balfouriana ostrina, underrepresented in botanic gardens. I think Denver Botanic Garden was the only garden that had it in their collections, and they had no provenance records and no. One of the important things when we're looking at these species for conservation programming is we want to know the origin of the seed. We want the genetic representation of the species. We find sometimes what happens is that plants are collected from the same location over and over, and so the full genetic range of a species isn't represented. Or sometimes plants are in the commercial trade, and nurseries don't necessarily track where they get their plant material from. And so that lowers the value for conservation use because we don't know where that particular genetic strain of that species came from. So it's really important we collect, elevation, partner species, who collected, when the collections were made, GPS coordinates for where the collections are. So and then we usually take a herbarium voucher as well, which I have a photo of in a little bit more detail. That herbarium voucher is also important for verification of species and then also future records. So that goes into digital herbaria records, things that show up in like Cal Flora, Oregon Flora Project. Those digital records help to document where a species exists over time. And so adding to that record is really important. These were nice to collect because we didn't have to climb the trees. We were able to reach the cones with the extension pole pruners. Seed yield was really great on these. We ended up with about 600 or 700 seeds. They were distributed to about 8 botanic gardens, and then also a large volume of seed was sent to the Royal Botanic Garden in Scotland and in Edinburgh, and they manage the International Conservation Conifer Conservation Program. And I have a link to their website, which is incredibly informative about threatened conifers globally and the work that they do, which is really important. It was really awesome for us to be able to get to these sites and then be able to share that seed with their program because they will distribute that to many other botanic gardens through Europe that are their partners for conserving conifer species. So through the ACS funding, that has a much wider reach. We can get a lot of leverage from a small grant that really is important work. This was we hiked up into Soretta Pass. Again, a drive in from Kernville, about hour and a half, 2 hour drive, and then a hike, a day trip in and out to about 9,000 feet above sea level. And it was, testing your lungs at those elevations. But absolutely amazing to see the trees in this location. Once we encountered the groves of Balfouriana at this site, again, they're the dominant species mixed in with, again, just like in the northern range, western white pine, which is interesting to think about. These two species, Balfouriana, that's so restricted range, but then growing with western white pine, which has an extremely big range, and as a species that occupies a lot of different niches, and how those two were still growing together, but we're looking at two different sort of subspecies of Balfouriana itself. There was good recruitment of small trees, which are also producing cones. Very slow growing, again, high altitude, very cold winters, lots of snow. Some concern, fire is not such a big concern up here because it's pretty rocky. There's some of the papers and discussions about future for these trees. There's some concern about the effect of air pollution because of the proximity to, a very large population. LA is really not that far from here, and what air pollution might do to long-term health of these trees. Juniperus grandis, we encountered this in Sherman Pass Road. You can actually drive on the road all the way up to see the trees in this location, but then further north at Carson Pass, which is where this photo is from, you can basically see them from the road as well, from Highway 88, Highway 4, Highway 50. So these are really accessible trees to go see. Again, some of these trees are estimated to be maybe in the 2,000 to 3,000 year old range. They're extremely tolerant of these high altitude sites. There was a lot of debate. This species usually used to be called Juniperus occidentalis. They were all lumped together. And you'll see in this map that the darker green is the occidentalis, the western juniper, and then the Sierra juniper is the light green that runs along the eastern sort of border of the Sierras, mostly is where it's found. And one of the things that sort of makes it stand out different is that the Juniperus grandis are about 90% of the trees are monoecious. So you have to find a female tree that's producing seed. So you've got your seed-bearing trees and your pollen-bearing trees. With occidentalis, that ratio is the opposite. About most of occidentalis are monoecious. So the pollen-bearing and seed-bearing on the same tree versus dioecious, where you have a pollen-bearing tree and a seed-bearing tree. And so we had to find trees that had the seed on them. So not every tree is seed producing for grandis. And then it's a 2-year maturity cycle. And so this is just a map, Carson Pass, kind of right in the middle, just for reference, that are not far from Lake Tahoe. Highway 50 is kind of the most common route people drive. They zip through that highway and probably don't stop and look at the trees. But again, if you're looking for a place to drive around in California and look at amazing conifers, Highway 4 through Markleeville and back up to Carson Pass, that loop was really spectacular country, and I highly recommend it if you have the opportunity to visit that area. Again, these are big trees. I have a full photo here. These are the 1-year-old juniper berry. So these are not, the seed is not mature in these. And so what we had to do is find trees basically where the seed was at the point of falling on the ground, and that was the 2-year mature seed. They're really hard to clean the seed. So this was one it took us a little bit of playing around with it to find the technique. We found vegetable oil to be really good at dissolving the resin, but again, they're incredibly sticky and breaking away the seed. And most of the juniper berries of this species contained about 2 or 3 seeds, I think we were getting at each one. Versus we also collected Juniperus californica And that juniper generally is just a single seed and was actually extremely easy to clean in comparison to Juniperus grandis. I haven't had any germination on these yet, and so I don't have any advice on growing this species. I think it would be great as a bonsai. I think it's got a potential for use in the landscapes because it should be pretty slow growing, and it seems like it might be way more adaptable than some of the sites we visited would suggest. All right, we're running out of time, and we've got so much still to cover, but we're going to get through these last few species and then just breeze through some photos. And Paiute cypress, this is a very, very restricted range, cupressus, and it is basically was lumped in with Arizonica for years. Again, it's different enough that it deserves to be its own species. So Hespericiferus nevadensis, it used to be listed as Arizonica subspecies nevadensis, but it definitely is a relative of. Of course, Hespericiferus across California, I think it always creates a lot of confusion. There's multiple species, and sometimes telling them apart can be somewhat difficult. We found nevadensis to have a very glandular feel and a rather pleasant fragrance. And really, in this area where we encountered it, it's the only Hespericiferus species. The largest grove exists on just outside of the town of Bodfish, so the south of Lake Isabella. And we did this road, which is Paiute Mountain Road. It's one of those funny roads that Google Maps will tell you it will take 2.5 hours to drive 30 miles, I think. And they're not far wrong. It definitely required, a high clearance vehicle. I think you could pick your way through there with 2-wheel drive. There's a lot of rocks and a lot of rough roads and switchbacks. The diversity that we found along the way on this road, though, was amazing. And again, one of the few places that you can easily access Paiute cypress in its natural sort of habitat. The other sites, there's about 8 other sites, we tried to find a couple of them and just didn't have good directions for where they really were. The pins that show up for Oregon Flora Project are not where the actual plants are found, or not Oregon, Cal Flora. And so they do require quite a bit of work to hike into valleys to find some of the other groves. And so on this trip, we did not have the time to get to the other groves that we'd hoped we would be able to get to. So we made our collections at the main Bodfish site, which is about a 250-acre sort of botanical interest area. It covers BLM land adjacent to it, and U.S. Forest Service lands, part of Sequoia National Forest. It goes from Juniper, California, Pinus monophylla, sort of scrub country, into the Hespericiferus habitat, where it's kind of the dominant species mixed with Arctostaphylos, Garrya, and a lot of scrub oaks, mostly Garryana Samota as a shrub, white oak that covers quite a lot of the understory areas, and then also Hesperyucca whipplei as well is pretty extensive through this area. The road goes up to about 8,000 feet elevation. We got up into the clouds and it rained. There's about 12 inches of rain in this area, and we were there for about 1 inch of that rain. So it was an interesting time to be there. And this is just a close-up of that foliage and an example of sort of our herbarium vouchers for this. Super easy to clean. These are plants that hold their cones until a fire event. So the bigger mature trees, the 100 to 300-year-old trees are absolutely coated in cones of all ages. And so it's very easy to collect a lot of cones and get a lot of seed. Again, I haven't had any germination yet. So I'm not sure what the success rate, but we expect to not have any problem growing this in Oregon at the Arboretum. I think it'll do fine. Um, just a quick scoot through other things we ran across. We're always interested in Pinus sabiniana, the ghost pine or gray pine, foothills pine, and it really occupies that foothills all the way around the Central Valley. It's a species we encounter with some regularity and should be good drought tolerant plant for Hoyt Arboretum. And so we can tell this apart from colder pine. Colder pine looks a lot similar, but colder pine's a much more restricted range, more in the coastal and south of LA. And colder pine has a large wing on the seed versus Sabiniana, if you see in this photo, the wing is somewhat abbreviated, so just squared off. And so if you have the seed out of the cone, but the cones themselves actually look surprisingly similar. And sometimes the foliage, even on the trees, can be a little bit ambiguous about which one you're looking at. But we really look at geographic range and that seed wing for clarification. Torreya californica, the California nutmeg, another species which they think about 50% of its range was impacted through logging. We visited sites along the Feather River looking for this tree that had extensive fire, and it is listed as a species that regenerates after fire. But on some of these sites with intense burns, we were unable to find Torreya growing in places that it had previously been recorded to be growing. And so I do have some concerns that it's very restricted to northern sites in the Sierra foothills, shady valleys, places where there is water drainage. It seems to also always grow with a massive amount of poison oak, which can be problematic for collections, and about 2 years to germination from the seed. And so we've had somewhat limited success growing this. If anyone has been growing Torreya, I know there's some other groups, the Torreya Guardians group, that have been working with this species. I'd love some tips on how to get better successful germination with this. True firs, got 3 species in the Klamath Range, and then further south, around into Abies magnifica, and then in the very southern Sierras where we're around Kernville, we have Magnifica varicrich feldii. In the northern range, we have Abies concolor, which is probably the biggest range, runs all the way through the Sierras from the Klamath down. And then Abies persera and then Abies shastensis, which are the two that I think create a lot of confusion. And the cones are really the key for those. You can see with shastensis, you have this very sort of squared off bract, which covers about 50% of the cone. Abies persera in the middle, the bract, exerted bract, is tapered to a point. And Michael Kaufman's book is exceptionally good at describing this characteristic, probably better than some of the other guides, and really how to tell those two species apart. And they just grow mixed in with each other. And Abies concolor, a lot of times the types we're growing in horticulturally, they're very long needle types, which is sort of the selections from maybe just a handful of trees. But more typically, in its native range, it's much greener than we see in the cultivated forms. And usually the needles aren't quite as long either, but the cone doesn't have an exerted bract, tends to be much smaller than the other conifers. Lots of great pines, monticola, monophylla, and Pinus flexilis, which we encounter in multiple places throughout California. Pinus attenuata, we love to collect Pinus attenuata because you get to set fire to the cones. These are one of those species that require fire. You can just dry them out over time, but there's no fun in that. It's much more fun to get the blaster out and just like hit them with some fire, let them burns off all that resin, let them dry, and they'll just naturally open up and release all those seed. It's a species we've grown at Hoyt. Our oldest tree is about 50 years old. And so we're just looking to add additional collections to the Arboretum. Pinus jeffreyi, and then of course Pinus ponderosa, extensive. Pinus jeffreyi is a serpentine specialist, and so we run into this a lot of times on those thin soil types and heavy metal sort of toxic soils, it's well adapted to those sites versus ponderosa, which is not. And I always find it to be sometimes a more awesome looking tree. And we often joke about Calicedra's as being the companion species for every collection that we make. The very southern Sierras, you don't encounter it, but basically throughout California and Oregon, this is a widespread species and seems to be adaptable to many different sites. And we see it with some regularity. I'm just jumping through a few here. Pinus contorta mariana, and a little video here. This is on the hike into the Conifer Miracle Mile. And so, again, I know there was a really good ACS Quarterly article. Some folks have done that hike from a few years ago. You can get back through the older references for that. And there's also a great write up in Michael Kaufman's books on this hike, and really recommend it. The species diversity along that hike obviously it has the highest density of conifer species anywhere in the world. And we did take some time to go and visit that area. The trips themselves are a blur. We hit a lot of sites, take a lot of photos, see a lot of trees. We collect seed off a range of different species, not just conifers. We have a lot of late nights cleaning seed. The end product is these packets of seed that are cleaned, ready for either international shipment. We share these out with multiple botanic gardens. Seed went to, we've had seed, goes to Canada with Bean and Laura at the University of British Columbia. They distribute to other gardens. We distribute across the United States to gardens. So the seed material ends up, being grown out in a lot of different sites across the US. And then, like I said, this year we also sent some internationally as well. Then pressing herbarium vouchers up in the corner there too every day. So adding to the collection vouchers when we get back to the Arboretum. Those are tracked in our taxonomist Mandy 2, goes through those, checks the verification for species, and then adds those into the Hoyt Arboretum herbarium. And then that ends up as a digital record for future. And then, of course, we're growing out all the material at the Arboretum nursery as well. Some of the species, like Balfouriana, maybe won't do so well for us. I know the Dorina, U.S. Forest Service Dorina Genetic Research Center, they're looking at white pine blister rust resistance for some of these species, and they're screening plant material. And so they're being really useful for some things that maybe we're not sure if we can grow because of white pine blister rust. This is sort of what the Hoyt Arboretum friends and we are working on a long-term, maybe in the next, ideally at our 100th anniversary, maybe a new visitor center facility and a new greenhouse facility, which of course for what we're working on would be pretty excellent to be able to add in bigger space. We're bringing a lot more valuable seed in, a lot more wild collected material, and having better growing facilities obviously helps us to, advance some of the work that we're doing. So we're hoping that this is what the future for Hoyt Arboretum looks like. And also, just say like being able to connect, rare species when you're doing conifer gardens yourself. We all like our, little dwarf conifers and cultivated forms, but if you can find space for a species conifer and find good source material to grow out some of these rare species, I just think that's, should be a part of our landscapes as well. And, rare species work shouldn't just be restricted to botanic gardens. These are things that people can grow as well, and just add them into your landscapes. Future, I'm really interested in working on Abies bracteata, additional Pinus culturi collections as well, looking at more drought tolerant plants that we'll add into the Hoyt landscape. And then just additional collections of some of the plants that we already grow. As I've sort of mentioned, Hoyt Arboretum's collection is pushing 100 years old. Some of the plants we need to be adding in, understory plantings to replace those plants so that, again, in the next 100 years, we have those collections as well. So it's just a list of, sources, great places to find more information about conifers, about, what grows near you, what grows in California. And these are all great resources. And then this is our collection trip from this year. It's myself, Noah, Gapsis from Santa Fe Botanic Garden, Ben Storms, Laura Caddy from University of British Columbia, and Christina Salvador from the Santa Fe Botanic Garden. And we're in front of General Sherman here in the Sequoia Grove. So, thanks for taking your time out to listen to the talk. And I think we maybe have a few questions. We'll see what came up in the chat.
Yes, we have a few questions. Thank you very much. That was very interesting. Fabulous area to go seed collecting in. And just to mention, if you ever get too many seeds, you don't know what to do with them, we have a new person in charge of our seed exchange. And I'm sure he would love to have some seeds in the fall to offer our members next year if you keep us in mind.
Yeah, totally.
That
Yeah,
would
I
be
think that
awesome.
could work out. Like I
Yeah,
said, I just feel like there's a need to get more more plant material, some of these rare species out. I think if people are growing, that'd be pretty good.
I know.
There's a question about, oh yeah, I didn't mention actually the foxtail pine. I will touch on the question. Who's the guy hugging the foxtail pine in that one picture? And that was Shael, which I think folks who maybe was in Minnesota American Conifer Society. Shael was our intern, and he got the scholarship to go to the American Conifer Society annual meeting 2 years ago. And he was our intern. He was from Trinidad. And that trip, that was the longest road trip he'd ever been and the highest elevation he'd ever been to as well. And so it was pretty fun. He was well outside of his usual environment. So it was really, really cool.
That's awesome. People are asking, do you have a Magnolia tour?
Yeah, we do. I do a public tour the first Thursday in April every year. And so that's a great chance to see. I'll be out in the Magnolia Grove. I just talk about what's in bloom at the time, things that are coming up. And so, yeah, if you're in Portland area and you want to come by and check out that. I didn't do a big, I also forgot to sort of plug, we're not a part of the American Conifer Society annual meeting tours, but Hoyt Arboretum's open. Folks who are coming into town for the annual meeting, you'll be driving past the Arboretum. We're along Highway 26, and take a couple hours out of your trip to come and visit Hoyt and check out our conifer collection while you're in Portland for the ACS annual meeting in June.
Cool. While we're talking, do you think you can put your source list of information on California conifers back up again so people can jot stuff down while we're talking?
Let's do that.
While you're doing that, people are wondering when you're collecting seeds, do you always collect the ones closer to the top, or is there a reason for that, or do different species produce seeds at different heights?
Yeah, it is. It is species dependent. For the brewer's spruce, the cones are at the top. That's where they are, and so true firs as well. The cones are at the top, and some of the photos of the true firs are a little misleading because it looks like I'm standing, 100 feet off the ground, but it's amazing. You can quite often find a 10-foot tall tree that has quite a few cones on the top of it. so a lot of times we don't have to climb those. The other thing we do with a lot of the true ferns too, we'll find a 60 foot, 70 foot tall tree versus a 150 foot tall one, and we use a throw line, and we'll throw with a big shot line over the cone, and usually we're there when the cones are almost mature and they're just about to fracture and fall apart anyway. And a lot of times we can pull those cones off of the tree, and they're just at that point of naturally falling apart. And then we just sort of collect all the pieces up as they hit the ground. So we use a range of different methods. Some of the species of pines, the cones are kind of scattered all around the edge of the canopy. So we'll get it to a high point, and really we're trying to collect. We're looking for the close to maturity cones, and so again, we're relying on the time of year. We're focusing around what our target species. So usually, this time we had three sort of target species. We knew Pinus balfouriana was probably the most problematic one for seed ripening, and so we're relying on some local expert information, looking at like iNaturalist photos, looking at herbarium records to try to get an idea of the best, most likely date we should be at that site for seed maturity to be hopefully the best. And we're not always right with that. Sometimes we've been a bit late and we've lost things where we get there and the cones have already released all the seed. And so that is part of it, especially when you're driving from Portland to Kernville. That was a 2,400-mile round trip for that collection trip. And the reason we drive is because we're collecting herbarium vouchers, we're bringing climbing equipment. So it's really hard to fly in and rent a car. We do also rent a second vehicle so that if we're unable to complete the trip because of a vehicle breakdown, we're investing so much time to being there that we want to make sure the seed collection is as successful as possible. So,
yeah, our lecture next Saturday is on mast seed production in conifers, how they have heavy fruit set some years and not other years. So that's going to be really interesting. It's kind of a community research project where people can help take photos of their conifers when they're coning and not coning, so they can. It's very interesting research they're doing. So on your trips into the mountains, do you see many witches' brooms while you're out?
yeah, we do find a few. Yeah, I always look out for them too. Yeah, we did. So I actually have one that we're not sure if it's taking it. We did graft up some from 2 years ago's trip, and so I'm not talking about it yet until I know if we have any success with it. But yeah, I keep an eye out for nice witches' brooms too.
Cool. Um,
Yeah.
for people that are looking for the recordings for all our lectures, right now we're right in the middle of getting the next Conifer Quarterly out, so we'll have the lectures available later in March. Second or third week in March is what we're shooting for. So emails will go out, and we'll put the post on the website when they're ready. So thanks for reminding me to mention that. So everyone says thank you, great presentation. We really enjoyed it. Looking forward to visiting the Arboretum and many other gardens this June.